water outlook for the southeast U.S. Well, we've had this very pesky low pressure area aloft. It's somewhat of an unusual pattern. It does occur from time to time, but it really does disrupt weather when it does that. It's sort of formed in the Midwest and it's drifted down towards the southeast U.S. And pretty much in its track, we've had some very significant snow up in the upper Midwest, and then a band of very heavy rainfall over parts of the Midwest. But it looks like the southeast is really the spot where the heaviest rain has occurred. And this low is detached from the upper flow, so the jet stream is still to the north, a little bit to the south, but this low is sort of a separate entity in itself. Now, I wanted to show you the alignment of precipitation bands. They really are sort of a streaky type band, and once they set up, they really funnel moisture into a fairly narrow axis. And I wanted to show you 3 of them. And each one of these produced significant rain. That first one sort of along the Mississippi River Valley, Memphis to St. Louis. Another one, and that was on day 1. Day 2, the band over parts of Alabama, very heavy rain near and southeast of Birmingham. And then the third band set up more recently, and that was on day 3. Actually the evening of day 2 into day 3, and that was over northern parts of Georgia, including some very heavy and record rainfall at Atlanta. So the rain that occurred last week, sort of an overall summary here, over the southeast U.S., this was a very widespread rain event. Now look how widespread the area of yellow is, 2-inch rains, and I use that sometimes as my threshold for the heavier rain. Embedded in there is the 3-inch rain, the darker yellow, and then embedded in there are these areas, these pockets of very heavy rain, red, over parts of far north Georgia, a few spots in Tennessee, around Jacksonville and Mobile Bay, and then in the area near and just a bit east of Memphis. So very widespread rain with this upper low, slow moving. Matter of fact, you can sort of see that in the southeast U.S., this was that streak number 1. There was the streak number 2, and here was the streak number 3. So all 3 of these streaks of focused moisture produced heavy rain over the southeast. As you might suspect, soil moisture is very wet right now, especially over all of Mississippi and Alabama, North Georgia, and with that heavy rain in this area, this has also become a little bit more saturated over the last day. But we still have this line where the eastern parts of the Carolinas, eastern Virginia, and much of Florida, with the exception of that rain near Jacksonville, remains dry. But from a southeast perspective, most of the region is fairly saturated. Now, you might expect that stream flow responded. Soils were moderately wet in areas before this rain moved in, and consequently stream flow is very high. Blue are high stream flow locations, black are extremely high in some spots near flood. And you can see the areas that received the heaviest rain, we do have high stream flow. Matter of fact, if you look across, if you sort of step back and look at a national perspective here, you can see some of the national trends. The western U.S. has been very dry. Remember the forest fires, it's been very dry over the southwest U.S., very dry over Texas. The northeast U.S. hasn't really received that much rain either, so that's very dry over the northeast U.S. But the center part of the state, all the way, or the nation, what we have here is this is the area that's been the wet trend as we've gotten into the late winter into the spring, and consequently stream flow is very high in those areas. Now keep in touch with the official Weather Service forecast for flood warnings and forecasts. I did want to show you that there are a number of spots that have risen into or are forecast to rise into minor flooding. These are these areas, these orange squares, high flows in the areas in yellow. Could be a couple isolated spots around in moderate, which would be red, but the latest rain has brought some scattered flooding over north parts of Georgia, far western Carolinas, northern Alabama. And with this heavier rain moving off to the east, very likely that the western parts of the Carolinas could have the possibility of some flooding as well. Okay, here's the setup for this week. What we have here are we have the jet stream early this week. You can sort of see it's up well to our north. And this shows you, even though the jet stream's not over our area, this detached low is really impacting our weather. And then by late this week, the jet stream begins to dip, and there's a little bit of energy in there, but you can still see it's generally north of our area. The path of this cutoff low over the next several days gradually moves off to the northeast. You might remember it sort of came down this direction, so sort of rotating around very slowly. And I did want to mention that the Arctic Oscillation has been positive. I don't have a graph of that, but the Arctic Oscillation has been positive, and that's why the jet stream is remaining fairly far to the north. Now, this is a good example of even with a positive Arctic Oscillation, temperatures can be cool because the rainfall and the cloud cover sort of overrides the prevailing overall type of flow. Once this low moves out, temperatures will rebound very quickly, and we'll probably get more under that influence of that positive Arctic Oscillation. So here's the rainfall forecast for this week. The low that I just mentioned, that cutoff upper low, closed low, will be drifting off to the east. And whenever I see heavy rain amounts in the higher elevations or close to it, keep in mind that could be flash flooding and debris flow. But the heavier rain does move into the Carolinas, especially the western parts of the Carolinas. And it really looks like once that low pushes off, there's probably not going to be anything all that significant for the rest of the week. There's a weaker system late in the week, but right now it looks fairly quiet. Now, I wanted to give a heads up for further in the month. I went out through the close towards the end of May 21st, and these are just some of the prevailing patterns right now that are showing up. And it still looks like this boundary between sort of the colder and warmer air here is wet. And that does show that there is that possibility as we get into week 2 of more rain over parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, maybe northern parts of Alabama and Georgia. So keep that in mind. I'll be covering that more, but it looks like that trend could continue. But it still looks like the eastern parts of the Carolinas will be a fairly quick drop-off from wet to getting dry, and also it looks like it should be drying out over the southern parts of Alabama and Georgia as we get into the middle part and the latter part of May. So soil moisture changes through May 12th. It looks like most of the area gradually dries out a bit as the precipitation frequency this week reduces. We do have some possibility of increasing soil moisture in the western Carolinas and Virginia as that closed low moves up into that region. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing: heavy rain event will gradually be moving east and northeast as the upper low moves into that direction. Overall, it could be a quiet rest of the week, maybe late in the week a chance of some precipitation, but for the most part it looks like once this low moves out, it looks like it should be fairly quiet, but it could be active again next week, and I will be updating that in my midweek briefing. Thanks for listening to this week's Outlook, and we'll be talking to you again next week.